Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks for being here. My point of this segment is we need to stop caring about what teenagers think. Knock it off. Stop caring what teenagers think about anything. We need to train and raise our kids to be adults and not let kids dictate our culture. First, just to show an extreme example of this, we'll play this video of a woke, I don't even know what they're called, like Zoomers or whatever, a recent college graduate. Here you go.
Exactly. I am the oppressor. I am racist. Oh my God, he just said he's racist. It shouldn't be this hard, you guys. If you live in America, went to school, participate in the socioeconomic structures, participate in any sort of system, education, business, entertainment, what have you, and you are white, you are indoctrinated, you are oppressive, and yes, you are racist. It is something that we have learned, either consciously or subconsciously, all of us as white Americans. And what we have to do is unlearn that. I'm trying to do the work. Part of doing the work is pushing against dangerous narratives that are counterintuitive to that unlearning, like white people are also oppressed by racism. We're not. We are the oppressors. That's the point. You should be doing the unlearning too. Do the work.
Do the work, people, do the work. So, you older folks, you know, us in charge, you got a choice. Do you stand up for the truth and what's right? Or do you cave and follow the ignorant, woke kids? I appreciate younger people's idealism and passion, blah, 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 but it's misguided and it's weaponized against you and against the truth. So knock it off. The New York Times science reporter, have you heard this guy? He started at the Times in 1976, started at the very bottom as a copy boy. And then he worked his way up and he's been the science reporter for a while now, 45 years. 2018, he went on a New York Times sponsored field trip for high schoolers to Peru. I heard that right. A New York Times sponsored field trip for high schoolers to Peru, $5,500 plus airfare for 2 weeks in Peru. So it's safe to say this is for a certain demographic of high schooler. So they're all there and they're sitting around the table, whatever, at some nice restaurant. And some of the students asked him what he thinks about this other student who used the N-word. And this reporter, he said, well, what was the context of it? Was the kid using it as a racial attack? Was he quoting a rap lyric? Was he reading from some historical book? What was the context of the use of the N-word? And in asking those questions, he used the N-word. This is 2018. This is 3 years ago. And it just now came out, and the New York Times fired him for using the N-word. 150 New York Times staffers demanded that he be fired, and they said this stunning line. They said, intent does not matter. Wow, intent does not matter. Now, there's a lot of different angles we can go here, but I want to go in this direction. There was another student who was there. She was 17 at the time. She was a student at Phillips Andover School, or Philip Andover. Philip or Phillips, I don't know. $60,000 a year to go to this prep school, right? 60 grand. And now she's at an Ivy League school, of course. She said, I'm very used to people, my grandparents or people's parents, saying things they don't mean that are insensitive. You correct them. You tell them, you're not supposed to talk like that. And usually people are pretty apologetic and responsive to being corrected. And he was not. So 3 years later, they destroyed his career. A 45-year career destroyed by a teenager who, as Glenn Greenwald wrote, a teenager who has this mentality that comes from being born into an extremely rich family and sheltered at $60,000 a year prep schools. Adults need to stop caring what teenagers think. Let me say it again for the fourth time. Stop caring what teenagers think. So the cultural reason for this is pretty interesting, and it's everywhere. So forever, adults, right, our elders, were honored and revered for their wisdom. You think of like the tribal elder. Who is the tribal elder, right? Is the oldest person there, long beard, sitting in, right? And you sit at the feet of the elder and you learn from them, right? So that was, so forever, the elders were revered and honored for their wisdom, and kids were seen, not heard. Now, backwards, it's the other way around. Kids are revered for their wisdom, and our elders are neither seen nor heard. We tuck them away in old age homes. So where did this come from? Where did this switch come from? It came from Rousseau. Rousseau and others, but Rousseau was the guy who created this idea that you're born pure and you become corrupted as you get older. So a 50-year-old is very corrupted, right? A 50-year-old's been corrupted by the world for 50 years, but a 12-year-old is as pure as the driven snow. Therefore, the 12-year-old is wiser and has more insight into the ways and the truth of the world than this older, corrupted 50-year-old. That's the philosophy of today, and it is total garbage. Kids know nothing. They need to be trained and raised by adults. Kids need to be taught to acquire the tools of learning. Then they can start to learn things, and then maybe one day they can earn wisdom and have anything important or valuable to say. Now, it goes both ways. It's not only, it's the pride of children that says, I know everything, right? But it's also adults who are like, yeah, you're right, you do. Right? It's adults who do this like, old people really screwed things up, and we need the next generation to fix our mistakes. And there's truth to that, right? Of course, the next generation is important. There's always a kernel of truth to all this stuff. But don't get caught up on that kernel. The next generation may need to fix mistakes, but not now, right? Like not when they're 12, is what I mean. Stop with the empty praise for a bunch of stupid kids. You see it, the most extreme example for all this progressive postmodern stuff can be seen in the whole transgender stuff, right? So if you always want the end, the logical end to any progressive ideal, you just go to the transgender movement and you can see it in action. So the logical end to this thinking is with transgenderism, where the doctor doesn't really know the baby's gender. The doctor just guesses if it's a boy or a girl. What we really need to do is let the 3-year-old decide. The 3-year-old knows. The doctor doesn't. What does the doctor know, am I right? But the 3-year-old, in all their pure innocence, the 3-year-old really knows deep down what gender they is, right? Think about it like this. Who's the most famous climate scientist today? Greta Thunberg. Why? Why is Greta Thunberg the most famous climate scientist? Because she's a child. I read a story about her the other day, and the picture they chose on the headline was when she was like 12. She's 18 now. So why don't they choose a picture of her now? Because that takes away from her moral authority. She had moral authority because she was 12. And now she's 18, and now she's like, nothing, doesn't matter. But even now, and even when she was 12, she always looked much younger than she even was. So when she was 12, she looked like she was 7. So they did that purposefully. Like whoever chose that picture did that purposefully. Because our era values the passion maybe from kids over the wisdom of adults. And again, there's a kernel of truth to it. There's always a kernel of truth. Adults have screwed things up a lot. Thanks a lot, 60s. And many adults don't have any wisdom to share. So that's true. And also kids, they haven't been doing things for a long time, so they can maybe ask good questions. They'd be like, oh, why are we doing it this way? I don't understand, right? So there's like a back and forth there, that's good. But don't mistake that for, the kids are always right. We need to bow down to the demands of the next generation today. No, stop. We would never do that with anything else. It's so bizarre. Like if you're building a house, all right, you got guys on the job. I was just talking to a guy the other day who was a carpenter, and I asked about his career, and he's like, well, I really want to do the crown molding of houses. And I was like, oh, so he's like, oh no, it took me years and years before they let me do the crown molding. I had to first start off with the foundation, and then I had to be the framer, and then I had to do this job and this job and this job and this job, and then they would let me watch the guy who did the crown molding, right? There's guys on this job site who have been there forever. They've been doing this for decades. You don't have some 12-year-old roll up and tell them how to frame a house and how to put up the drywall It's like, get out of here, kid. Right? The new guy, 18 or 20 or whatever, the new guy shows up and watches and listens and learns and asks questions and then works, and maybe one day they'll have enough experience to have something interesting to say and start to do good work. It's the same thing with raising kids, but we don't do it that way when it comes to raising kids. When it comes to cultural things, we put the kids in charge first. Commercials, music, movies, everything is based on youth culture. And that's why everything sucks. That's why everything is such low quality and terrible. And it's relevant to us, all of us, right? And you think like this, oh, who cares, Slater? This New York Times reporter. It's not about the New York Times reporter. It's an example of youth culture taking over. Because this cultural messaging has entered into almost everybody's home. The kids run the show. The kids dictate everything. The kids are in charge. And it's not, I'll give you an example, like the adults are having a dinner, the kid says, I don't like this dinner, and the adults get up and make a different dinner for each individual kid. You kidding me? The kid's in charge. And it's not healthy for them, it's not healthy for your marriage, and it's not good for our culture to be teaching them that they're in charge at such a young age. I gotta go over here, but go to mikeslater.locals.com. That's our social media page. We're off of big tech. So go to mikeslater.locals.com, and I have an article of 10 indictments against the church. It's by Paul Washer, pastor. And one of the indictments is against Sunday school and youth groups. Against Sunday school and youth groups. Because the very short of his argument is churches spend tons of money on Sunday school programs and resources and conferences. But how many resources and conferences and man hours are spent on training fathers on how to teach their children? So mikeslater.locals.com for the full argument. We actually spent an hour on this yesterday on our radio show, so you have it on there on the website. But the point is, are we training and raising our kids ourselves, or are we outsourcing everything to other people and other institutions, or people in Hollywood, or people in Silicon Valley to do it all for us? Because it's easier. Truly, if you're raising kids and you give your kid an iPad for 30 minutes, you're having Silicon Valley raise your kids. You put them in front of the TV to watch this cartoon, you're having Hollywood raise your kids. People in Hollywood. You don't want people in Hollywood or Silicon Valley raising your kids. They have a completely antithetical worldview of yours, and they hate you. They hate your worldview. Why are you letting them raise your kids? Why? Because we've all now have this belief that the kids should be in charge, and whatever the kids want to do, we let the kids do. No, you're in charge. Who's really raising your kids? If you're not in charge, your kids are. But your kids aren't really even in charge. It's people in Silicon Valley and Hollywood and all the rest who hate you who are in charge. And they're the ones raising your kids. One last final thought here. Church on Sunday should be the supplement to the week of worship in your home, not the center of your worship. Church is the supplement to. Same thing with education. School should be the supplement to your child's education, not the center of your child's education. Same thing with influences. Friends, your kids' friends should be a supplement to their social circle, not the center of their social circle. So we're all centered around the wrong things. And it comes because adults have abdicated their responsibility and we let the kids be in charge. Knock it off. You are the adult. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hi, Slater Crusaders. The wokeism religion, the wokeism cult, it's infiltrated everything, including your church. Be very careful. I want to talk about Max Lucado. I don't know much about Max Lucado. I got a Max Lucado book over there that my wife read about not worrying, not being anxious. But I don't know much about him. He's a pastor in San Antonio. Sold a ton of books. He's got 1.3 million Twitter followers, whatever. Right? He's a popular, influential guy. And he was asked to give a video sermon to the members of the Washington National Cathedral. You've seen the Washington National Cathedral before. It's the big, giant cathedral that is in D.C. It's beautiful, stunning building, right? I did not know that that was an Episcopal church, which is a heretical church. Beautiful building, and heresy going on inside. They perform same-sex marriages. So the church invited Max Lucado, who's an evangelical preacher. And people protested that. Members protested because in 2004, he gave a sermon against homosexuality. You know, like what the Bible says. And there was an article that was associated with his sermon, and the article was called "What God Says About Gay Marriage." And it's gone. I can't find it anywhere. I'm pretty good at the Google machine. I use it all day, nonstop, all the time. Pretty good at Google. I can't find the article anywhere. Every site I go to that finds it, it says like, oh, this article was removed by its owner, right? So it's been scrubbed from everywhere. So I don't know what it said. I can't find the sermon. I can't find what was written in 2005. I don't know where it is. But he probably quoted the Bible. The only thing I could find about the article was from someone who's against Lucado, who was criticizing what he said, obviously, and said, oh, Max Lucado, he called homosexuality a sexual sin. That's the horrible thing. So there's this big petition. He ended up speaking, or virtually did a video. And now the church leadership is apologizing and bending over backwards for the deep harm they've caused by allowing Max Lucado to speak. He wasn't speaking about homosexuality, he was speaking about the Holy Spirit, right? So there was deep harm. The reverend of the church says that the church has wounded them. Real deep pain, all this nonsense. So this weekend, one of the reverends gets up, who's gay, a gay reverend. He says, to those of us who are LGBTQ, which, by the way, is such a weird line. Like, I think like LGBTQ community is kind of a weird phrasing too, but you can't be lesbian, gay, bi, trans, and queer. So it's weird to say those of us who are LGBTQ. Anyway, while a lot of us are still in pain, while a lot of us have experienced some awful things in our lives, we've won. We know how this is going to end. This is going to end with the full inclusion of gay and lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer people, non-binary people, all kinds of people in the church and into the society. We work every day to make that true, but we know how it ends. So the thing is, he's right. That's definitely how it ends. I remind you, in 2008, in California, 52% of Californians voted to define marriage between marriage between a man and a woman. That was 2008. 52% of Californians. Okay? How times have changed and how quickly. And now, from the pulpit. Now, this is all bad enough, right? But whatever. This church can do whatever they want, right? It's the fact that Lucado then apologized for what he said in 2004, because he may have hurt people. He said, I wounded people in ways that were devastating. What? So here's the deal. Here's the concern. I'm trying to paint this visual here. You got the church. I should say you got the world, right? So, well, let's do this. You got the church here, you got the church, right? Church. Truth. Hard truth. It's not easy to hear the truth. And then over here, you got the world. The world tells people whatever they want to hear. Whatever they want to hear that makes you feel good. Truth is never a factor, never considered, right? It's whatever makes you feel good right now is great. That thinking has tried to get into the Christian circle, right? It's been banging on the doors, trying to knock down the gates of the Christian community. But it's like, no, we are different from the world. The Bible's full of this. Do not be of the world, right? Tons of, right? So the world's been trying to get in, and they found their way in through the Episcopal Church. So they got in through the Episcopal Church. The Episcopal Church opened up the gate over here and said, come on in, world. So the world got in here. And now the world is in this Christian circle. And now you have Christians in the Episcopal Church and other denominations as well, I'm not just picking on them, who are pointing at other Christians now from within the walls, saying, oh, you're being mean. You don't have compassion. You don't have love. They've weaponized compassion and love to attack Christianity and other denominations and preachers and the Bible itself as being mean or intolerant or unloving. That's the problem. And it's all done in the name of this woke cult and all the woke terms and everything. That's why you got to be careful if your church is ever using any of these woke terms, because the ideologies are right behind it. People don't want to hear about their sin. People don't like to hear about it. This is true for the world and Christians. People don't like to hear about their sin. And because they don't want to hear about it, they never see the need for God. Again, this is true for Christians too. The philosophy of the day, this goes back to our last segment talking about Rousseau, how kids are born pure and all that. The philosophy of the day is that people are inherently good. People are inherently good. And if that's true, then who needs Jesus? Or like at best, Jesus becomes like a self-help life coach that you can like kind of call on when things get a little difficult. If you're perfect, who needs grace? So that's why everything today is preached about you're perfect, you're perfect, you're perfect, you're wonderful, you're just the way you are. You do you, you be you. You don't need to change, you're wonderful. Because we don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. We don't want to make anyone uncomfortable. We don't want to make anyone mad. We don't want to make anyone sad. And now it's even more than it's equated like being mad. Like if I make you sad, then I'm causing harm, like physical harm. I'm hurting you, deep pain, because I'm saying that we all commit sins. When the Bible says, so the Bible says to mourn and weep. It's James 4 something, somewhere in James 4. It says, let your laughter be turned to mourning. And you hear that and you're like, well, I like to laugh. Why would I let my laughter be turned? He's not talking about being a Debbie Downer all the time. It means your flippant laughter, right? The flippant laughter when you're engaging in sinful behavior, like a mocking laughter or like a celebration of sin laughter. He's saying, no, stop that and mourn for your sin. We don't do that anymore because it hurts, doesn't feel good. Our culture, the highest priority is not offending anyone. You don't want to offend anyone ever. I think of it like a doctor, right? So let's say you go, imagine this. You're going to a doctor, you're getting a cancer screening. And the doctor gets the results. And the results are that you have cancer. But the doctor doesn't want to make you sad. The doctor doesn't want to hurt your feelings. The doctor doesn't want to ruin your day, right? He knows you're worried, he knows you're nervous, but he knows you have kids and a family, and he doesn't want to like cause stress. He doesn't want you to have to change anything about your life because that's not tolerant, it's not sensitive. This truth that you have cancer, it could cause harm by having you have to change your day and, So the doctor decides to keep the news to himself. And he comes back into the office and you're waiting and he says, congratulations, you are cancer free. Oh, wonderful. Feels great. You bound out of his office, I'm cancer free. And you go tell all your friends and everybody you're cancer free. And the doctor feels good. He pats himself on the back because he just made your day. But the truth is, you have cancer. And the doctor's desire to be nice over the truth resulted in you not seeing the truth and not doing the things that you need to do to get healthy. And then you die. Sin's the same way in our modern culture. We refuse to see it. Oh, doesn't feel good. I don't think we've ever talked on the TV show, but on the radio show, we've talked a lot about this book. It's called After the Ball, How America Will Conquer its fear and hatred of gays. It's something like that. It's by Marshall Kirk and Hunter Madsen. It started over a magazine article called The Overhauling of Straight America. So these are two Harvard guys. It was 1987 they wrote this magazine article, and it was about how to mainstream gay culture in America. And everything they did, everything they said they should do, They did. And it worked. Go over to our website, mikeslater.locals. We're getting off big tech. So mikeslater.locals.com for that article. And you can read the whole thing. It's pretty short. And they have 6 things. Like, here's the 6 things we need to do to normalize homosexuality in America today. And they did them all. Maybe one day we can go over it, but you can get a head start and check it out, mikeslater.locals.com. I bring it up here because the woke mobs are doing the same thing today. They're using the same methods today. And it's bad enough when it happens in the world. It's even worse when it happens in the church. And when it does, the dominoes fall. One biblical truth and one groveling apology at a time. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So we talk about different worldviews all the time. It's really important to understand the worldview that people have and that we have as we encounter any situation. And Joe Biden and Democrats on the left, they have a very different worldview when it comes to everything, particularly the economy. Or I should say, what we're going to talk about in this segment is the worldview when it comes to the economy. This is a good hint of what's to come. This is a question for Biden's press secretary.
What is President Biden doing for my small business? First and foremost, he nominated a woman to lead the Small Business Administration who formerly worked there.
A woman. So there's a woman leading it, so it's great. She did a very similar thing with Janet Yellen. Like, oh, well, what are we going to do with GameStop and the stock market? Well, Janet Yellen's a woman. That's the worldview. Sam Gregg is here. He's the research director at the Acton Institute. Mr. Gregg, how are you, sir?
Great. It's great to be with you, Mike.
Thanks for being here. So what do you think about this worldview? What is their worldview, and how is the Biden team approaching these economic issues?
Well, I think you pretty much nailed it with that little clip from the press secretary talking about a question about small business. Small business is obviously extremely important to the United States. Small business leaders, executives want to know what the Biden administration's policies are going to be in this regard. And to say, well, the SBA is being headed up by a woman is not actually an answer to the question, but it reflects what I think is going to be the way that the Biden administration is going to be talking about economic policy. Yes, they'll talk about some of the more traditional things that you would expect, but it's fascinating to me that they're leading with something like, well, the person who's running this department is a woman, or the person who is doing this belongs to this particular group. It really reflects, I think, the way in which much of the left, and this is reflected in a lot of the Biden administration, is basically building what you might call, well, what is, frankly, identity politics into everything, so that things like monetary policy, which is of course what the Federal Reserve deals with, the fact that these issues are somehow being tied to identity politics, well, I think it's actually good. These things should have nothing to do with things like that. Things like monetary policy, things like government spending, these are things that deserve to be treated on their own merits. And frankly, I don't care what skin color or gender the person heading up these organizations are. What matters is the competence of the person and the type of economic views that they bring to bear. So answering by saying things like, well, such and such a thing is headed up by a particular person from a particular background really doesn't tell us anything. What it does tell us is the way that much of the left thinks about these issues. Everything is viewed through the lens of identity, identity, identity. That's a problem.
Let me play a little devil's advocate, and then we'll get to the
Sure.
problem with it. Devil's advocate. A woman has a different perspective on the needs of female small business owners, or a black person will have a different view on some things that would be a blind spot to white supremacists like us, Sam, that we would miss. So we need this underrepresented opinion to have a higher seat at the table. What do you say to that?
Well, the response would be that things like economic policy, things like monetary policy, things like interest rates, things like levels of government spending, they actually exist quite separately from whatever people's views happen to be about all sorts of things. And actually those things exist independently and hold true regardless of whether the person who's articulating them is black, white, whatever. You see, that's the thing about economics. It does exist on its own. Economic policy does exist on its own. And it doesn't matter whether the person implementing it is black or white or whatever. What matters is the policy itself. Think of it this way. If you lower interest rates, does it really matter if the person lowering interest rates is black or white or male or female? Absolutely not. Does that have any effect? The person's skin color, does that have any effect on the effects of interest rates on the economy? Of course it doesn't. So I think it's very clear that when we think about this, we start to realize that making assessments of these things based upon skin color or gender or whatever is highly dysfunctional. It's highly dysfunctional, and it worries me that in the future we may see administration officials excusing policy failures by saying, "But hey, look, we appointed a black woman or a white woman or whatever or whoever it happens to be." So we get into this game of somehow saying that real achievement or real policy progress is somehow conditioned upon a person's skin color.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I wanted to ask you what the problem with this is, right? Because it's got to be more than just, oh, that's silly, right? But I like that first point that perhaps these people would be immune from criticism, because you can't, one aspect of white supremacy is meritocracy, they say. So you can't judge based on merit. That's one problem. What's another problem with this line of thinking?
Well, the accountability one, I think, is the big one, that people basically excusing things on the basis of, well, he's white, he's black, she's white, she's black, whatever. But the other problem, I think, is that when you start excluding legitimate insights based upon the fact that it is a white man or white woman or whatever who says something, then you're losing sight of the real economic truth that's conveyed through a particular idea. To give you a very concrete example, the founder of modern economics, a guy named Adam Smith, lived in the 18th century. He was white. He would be dismissed today by many people as a sort of white male, et cetera, But guess what? His economic insights remain true, regardless of the fact that he is an 18th century white man saying these things. So the problem is that good economics and legitimate insights developed by people 200, 150 years ago, are we really going to reject these things simply because they were articulated by a person who comes from another time and another place and who the left insist on seeing in terms of old white men? That's disastrous. Yeah. Would we do that for the natural sciences, right? Would we say that, okay, Galileo was a white man, therefore things like gravity and laws of gravity somehow need to be viewed as tainted with racist presuppositions?
Yeah, I mean, yes, they do that, right? They do say that. That's why Shakespeare is being removed from curricula, right?
Right.
He's a white guy. He has nothing important to say, nothing relevant to say to people today, which is one of the most absurd things ever said. So there's almost two different things here. You have the fact that the head of the Small Business Administration and the head of the Fed is a woman and all this stuff. But then you have the equity policies and who they're directed towards, right? How we've seen the effects of vaccine distribution, right? It's got to be done. We did a segment on this yesterday where the Pakistani doctor in Houston got arrested because he was giving the vaccine to too many Indian people. He wasn't being equitable enough with his vaccine distribution. So that's a problem. So you have the people themselves, and then you have the people who these policies are supposedly benefiting, done in a poor way. Can you speak to that group, and what's the history of that type of thinking, like the effects of that type of thinking?
Well, the history of that type of thinking is very bad, frankly. Here's an example. Think of the late 1990s when the Clinton administration redesigned housing policy and mortgage policy because they wanted to try and encourage more people who were from particular backgrounds, low-income backgrounds, from particular demographic backgrounds into home ownership. Well, home ownership is a really good thing. But the problem was, of course, that this fundamentally distorted the workings of the mortgage market, and that helped to contribute 10 years later to this thing called the financial crisis. So that's one thing. I think that economics tells us there are often unintended consequences from these types of actions. The second thing I would say is that the way that the phrase equity is being thrown around by sections of the left is actually in complete contradiction to the classic understanding of what equity is. Equity is about treating people fairly. When courts of law, when they traditionally have applied equity, it's precisely in a way to try and correct for deficiencies of fairness, of justice, not deficiencies in terms of whether you're talking or dealing with one particular group rather than another. So the whole way that they talk about these things, I think, is they basically have distorted the classic meaning of what equity is supposed to be about. And that, I think, is a sort of the bigger problem, which I think we're going to see magnify itself beyond economic policy and hit much more all aspects of everything that the administration is doing.
And we'll see many, many examples to come. Sam Gregg, research director at the Acton Institute. Sam, let's talk again. I'm curious about your book, Reason, Faith, and the Struggle for Western Civilization. So hopefully we could talk about that another day, sir.
I'd love to do so. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, my pleasure. Sam Gregg, Acton Institute. Good stuff. Every day you'll see a new example of this, by the way. Every day you'll see a new example of equity and equity of outcome versus opportunity leading their worldview charge. More coming up. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, I want to get right to our next guest, Claston Bernard. He is running for Congress in a district just outside Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and there's an open seat, so the election's in a month. So we want to support him, get him up to D.C. He's also the author of the book, Outcast, No Room at the Table for Conservative Blacks in Black America, and also an Olympian. In what year did you go to the Olympics, Claston?
2004.
Beautiful. That's awesome. Thanks for being here, brother. First, I want to play this. I want to show this graph up here. I don't know if you can see it or not, but it's just about the demographic makeup of the different parties, and people can read the headlines there, and how Republicans need to do better, reaching out to the black vote, which is a term I don't like. But what do you make of that? How do we get more conservatives in our movement?
Well, one, we have to stop paying lip service. That's the first thing. We spew off a whole lot of conservative talking points, and then we criticize the Democrats and says, hey, the Democrats are running these cities in the ground, but most people in these cities don't even know who a Republican is. We don't create footprints. We just think that lofty arguments and rhetoric is going to do it. And that's why so many Republican conservative candidates get rejected by the black community. They really don't know. When you talk to them, when you're on the street, you get a feel that these are people. And in fact, most people that I've talked to on the street right now doing campaign, they're very conservative in their ideas. But when faced with what should they do, they're not given any choice. You know, just like the free market, the more choices they have, the better the results tend to be long term. We're not giving them a choice. We're just leaving these areas vacant and then spew lip service and then say, well, we need more black votes. We need more minorities. Well, go where they are. That's what you do. If you're a business, you set up shop where you want the customers. Isn't that right? That's how it's supposed to work. But we don't. You know, we just allow these areas to be controlled by whatever forces, and think that, hey, you know, we have this superior moral authority or moral arguments, so that is going to just pull them in. You have to meet people where they are sometimes.
I'm such a firm believer in this idea that most people are conservative by nature, like they have conservative philosophies and a conservative worldview, but there's a disconnect between that worldview and like policies and their voting, as you spoke of. So how does the Republican Party or conservatives make a footprint? What does that footprint look like?
The same way when in 1854, the Republican Party, when it was formed, it was formed to end slavery. You have to be steadfast. You have to go in when no one else is saying you have a chance. And you have to stand and fight and let them see that you're there to fight to the death for their values, for their lifestyle, for what you believe in. And too often, like I said, it's just about lip service. So that's what we have to start doing.
I know in your book you talk about, you make a sentence, a pretty bold claim, and correct me if I get this wrong, but that the black culture and American culture are incompatible. What do you mean by that?
You're either an American willing to live by the American ideals, or you're going to continue to spew this separatist, as you mentioned earlier. We can't be separate. We're one. When I look at Black Americans, I only see American. When I was traveling as a professional athlete with my American teammates, we are in France, we're in Australia, wherever we were, when people refer to them, black and white, they say Americans. They didn't say, look at those Black Americans. There was nothing. There was no hyphen. They knew distinctly we were American or you were Americans. My teammates, that's what they knew. And we need to understand that. That's how the world see us. And we have to see ourselves. Yes, there's some issues that has happened here, but we're living in a different time period. And we have to operate as such. Go back to even in the 1860s, after they killed Lincoln, and they were disposing of those blacks who end up getting lands from General Sherman. And they wrote a letter to the bigot at the time, Andrew Johnson, says, this is our home. Our ancestors are here. This is our country. That's how blacks viewed this country. So if the former slaves could view this country as their country, why are we today taking on Marxist ideologies that is designed to destroy America and then saying somehow you need to separate Black America from white America? It just won't work. Even the South, some of the cultural nuances are intertwined from the European and the African intermingling. You can't separate that anymore. It has distinctly formed into the American ideals. So we need to start talking in that sense. I give you another point. I grew up in Jamaica, and I didn't grow up with electricity or running water. We had those battery-powered radio. And with the battery power, that's the beauty of life. When I would hear someone, whether they were Lionel Richie, Kenny Rogers, or Charlie Pride, I didn't know what race they were, or Aaron Neville. I didn't know, so I just like what I like. I like country. I like Motown music. It didn't matter to me what color these people were. I just knew that I like what I heard. And the first time I started seeing TV, I saw James Brown singing "Living in America." That was in Rocky II. And man, I fell in love with this, the country, the vibrantness of this country, the freedom that they were talking about. It was socialism going up against the free market system. Who wouldn't like that kind of stuff? That is the American that I have in my head. And this is not saying there no, again, I'll make this point clear. Their history, but the history is in the past. It doesn't dictate your future. It's just there for you to learn from. It's not for you to go around parading and trying to dress people up today to try to relive something that no longer exists. We need to embrace America where it is. There are enough people here willing to move beyond that. And that's what I see when I see America. You can't continue to say we need a Black culture and an American culture. It won't work. Every country that they have tried this has fallen into civil war or just great atrocities.
Class, that's so perfectly said. And you are such a living embodiment of that from Jamaica. And also, as we talked about before we went live here, Louisiana, you're outside Baton Rouge. It's such an amalgamation of so many different cultures for so long. And it's turned into an absolutely beautiful thing, but it's a united thing. And it's so painful to see that being divided. What do you think the root of this division is? Why are there forces today prying open this legacy of slavery, et cetera? What's in it for them? What's their motivation?
Well, the strength of America has always been the family, God, family, and education. That's been the strength. When the Pilgrim came over in 1620, the Pilgrims came over because they wanted freedom to worship, freedom to raise their family, freedom to explore and live lives. In slavery, and go back to even 1776 after the Pilgrim, the country, the Constitution that we got recognized that all men were created equal. And a lot of the pieces that were laid for the 14th Amendment were already forming from 1620 onwards. America is, what people don't understand, the formation of America was the death knell of slavery. The British Empire started attacking it, but America played the decisive death knell to slavery. Now, during slavery, the strength of the black race was family, it was God, family, and education. Frederick Douglass, case in point, when he learned to read, he recognized that slavery was unfit for humanity. See, so it goes back. But he also, when he started attacking slavery, he started attacking the hypocrisy of the Christian church that was saying one thing about, slavery was okay. He started pointing out those hypocrisy. And we as a country, we as a society, we have to go to those values that binds us. So the values that are under attack is the values that were attacked in the original, from the originals in the family. That was the values that were attacked. God, you see, one of the things, when you talk politicians, most of them don't like history, or they don't like to talk about theology. But the reality is, we have a government because of a family. The family was the first institution created by God. That's it. The government is inferior to the family. The government does not get to elevate itself above the family. It doesn't get to elevate itself above God because it's not our creator. It came from us. We need to understand the purpose. So the government don't get to replace the man in the household. The government don't get to dictate what your rights are. It doesn't get to dictate who lives and who dies, except if someone is murdering someone. That's a whole different story. So the reality is, the system that was given to us, and as a Christian, you understand uniquely that government exists to help the family, not to control, not to dictate. But the government, the forces that are at bay, is the same forces that tempted Eve in the garden for power. Eat of this fruit and you become like God, knowing good and evil. So that's the force we're dealing with. These politicians, these theologians, these psychologists, they might never want to say, but one of the forces that we're dealing with today is the force, or the entity that appeared in the garden. But they're masquerading it as some political philosophy. It was said they want to become like God. So they have to elevate themselves above the family and then above God. So that's what we're dealing with. That's what is trying to destroy us.
So much truth, Claston. Beautiful. We got to run, and I hate we got to run. Would you say your accent is mostly Jamaican or Baton Rougean now? What's the nice mix you got?
There's a Cajun Jamaican.
Cajun Jamaican, I love it. It's beautiful. And
you know what my campaign is? You can find me at bernardforcongress.com. Look, I need your support. I need your vote. I need your donation. I need you. Hey, we need to find the ties that bind. We have to correct the destruction that is happening in the family.
Bernard, Bernard, bernardforcongress.com. Everyone go over there and give Bernard some money. Bernard, appreciate you, sir. Hope you win.
Thank you very much, man. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Need more Bernards in D.C., that's for sure. Mike Slater, spread the word. We'll do it tomorrow. Spread the word.